I work as a wildlife photographer and also look for animals in the natural environment. My son John and I live in a big city, and this makes my activities very difficult because there are no wild places nearby. There was not enough work, respectively, there was not enough money. In this regard, I decided to move to wild places and transfer my son to homeschooling. He really didn't want to move, but I explained that it was necessary. After a while, we found a suitable house in a small village. There were only forests around. They were inhabited by wild boars, wolves, and foxes with whom I work. The locals were very kind. We managed to get acquainted with many of them. At first, it was very difficult to get used to a new life. John was very angry. He was frightened by the noises in our wooden old house and the insects around. Because I got amazing photos in these places, it turned out to be expensive to sell them. Good money went again, and she reassured her son that when we collect a good amount, we will move to another big city. Over time, we got used to this kind of life until this happened. One night, the son yelled at the whole house as if he was being cut. I was scared of his scream when suddenly he flew into the room and jumped under my blanket. Out of fright, I ran to the door to the room and began to hold it. After asking John what happened, I was horrified to hear that outside the window he saw a woman covered in earth. Without thinking twice, I found the answer for myself. It was like sleep paralysis and bad sleep, but it still got creepy and I didn't want to check. I closed the curtains and got into bed. My son decided to lie down with me. He was still shaking. Then I hugged him and he fell asleep. It was difficult for me to fall asleep. Different thoughts were constantly coming into my head. Suddenly I heard footsteps on the street and was terrified myself. I began to reassure myself that they were animals. There can't be a ghost, then he would immediately begin to see, and not after a month of living here. What the imagination does not do. Turning off my thoughts after a short time, I managed to fall asleep. Waking up early in the morning, I saw that my son was still asleep. The first thing I wanted to do was inspect the house, but it was creepy to go out into the corridor. Because of the rain, it was dark outside and the rain was pounding on the roof. Having dared, I opened the door. Everything was in its place. First of all, I went to the light switch. Turning on the light, I calmed down. There were no signs of forced entry. I went to cook breakfast, and then my son woke up and came to my kitchen. In a pitiful voice, he asked us to leave this village, this house. Then my nerves could not stand it and I shouted that it was just a stupid dream, and we will move when we accumulate the necessary amount of money. He sighed sadly, and then we had breakfast. It was quiet for a couple of days. The son began to close the windows with curtains. But one day he ran into the house again and slammed the door loudly. With fear in his eyes, he began to tell all about the same woman. We searched the house for an hour, but we didn't find anyone. Going outside to drive away bad thoughts, I met a neighbor. Hoping for help and support, I told him about what had happened. The neighbor smiled, saying that for sure it was a dead woman, the first owner of this house. I almost fainted, but he laughed loudly and said that he was just joking, and for sure his son's imagination was playing out. Having calmed down, I returned home and decided to cook dinner. When everything was ready, I sat my son down at the table and began to take out mugs for tea. Suddenly there was a loud scream. Out of fear, I dropped all the dishes, but when I turned around, I didn't see anyone except John looking out the kitchen window. There was no one in it. This time I definitely did not believe my son, and called his actions a simple manipulation. He was offended and silently went to his room. Without thinking twice, I also decided to rest and go to bed early. It's so nice to fall asleep in a wooden house with a slight coolness. The eyes close automatically. I woke up to a knock on the window. It was scary to turn around and I decided to pretend to be asleep. You never know, a bat is knocking on the window. and yet it took me an hour to fall asleep. I woke up all broken and had a headache. I wanted to get some more sleep, but I didn't spoil the regime. Suddenly the phone rang. As it turned out, one of the well-known agencies really liked the photos taken by me. They decided to order photos from me of foxes devouring prey at night. It was a difficult order, but the pay was good and I agreed to try. After the call, my mood lifted. Finally, a good and highly paid order. While I was thinking, my son came into the room. He didn't talk to me, but I made him breakfast. After that, I sent John to my room to do his homework, and I began to think about how to lure the foxes out of the forest. After much thought, an interesting idea came to me. Since the places here are wild, animals often steal chickens from neighbors. Then I decided to open the gate for the night, and put a chicken carcass not far from the window. When the foxes come to the carcass, I'll take cool photos. After dinner, she warned her son not to make noise, and she opened the gate, put a chicken carcass, put on her camouflage and leaned out of the window with a camera. Surprisingly, they came running very quickly and I began to photograph them. They were greedily devouring the carcass, when suddenly they abruptly ran away. Something incomprehensible ran up to the chicken and began to eat it. I was scared, but decided to continue to sit. Looking closely at the camera, I saw that it was an elderly woman, covered in dirt. I wanted to slam the window, but I thought she would react faster and attack me. Then I began to hope that after eating this old lady would leave and not notice the open window. When she was madly devouring meat, only prayers came to my mind. After finishing the carcass, she suddenly stood up, looked straight out the window and began to smile. From fear, I even stopped breathing and closed my eyes. After a few seconds of opening them, no one was there. I immediately closed the windows and doors. I wanted to tell my son about the old woman, but I didn't dare. I just came up and apologized to him and said that we would leave here soon. We hugged and went to sleep in the same room. I was ashamed in front of him, but I need a couple more orders to raise money. Well, at least the fox managed to take a picture. When I woke up, I went to look at photos and found a photo of an old woman devouring the remains of raw chicken. I decided to go to a local grandmother, whom everyone here calls a fortune teller. I told her what was going on, and when I heard the answer, I froze. The old woman said that it was a spirit coming, and handed me several amulets, as well as an incomprehensible solution. It all sounded silly, but it's better to try something. I hung up the amulets. My son and I went to bed together. At night, we woke up to strong knocks on the window and an ominous voice on the street, who hoarsely asked for more food. My son burst into tears, and I didn't know what to do. Then the window broke. The creature began to climb quickly through the window. Without thinking, I grabbed a bottle and splashed it in the old woman's face. She growled and attacked me. With the last of my strength, I shouted to my son to run and call a neighbor. After that, I was left alone with this old woman. She dug her dirty nails into me, drooling. Then the old woman bit off a piece of my skin. I tried to throw her away, but nothing worked. She had superhuman strength. Then my son and a neighbor came running. He began to pour holy water on us and read prayers. After unsuccessful attempts to exorcise the demon, the neighbor pulled her away from me and helped tie her up. We immediately called the police and an ambulance. She was taken away. And after a while we found out that it turned out to be a crazy grandmother who ran away from home from a neighboring village and got lost in the forest. She was insanely hungry, and she has such strength and strange behavior due to mental disorders. The only good thing is that the old woman's picture was bought by a mystical channel and we had enough money to return to the city. Only now they often show this photo in mystical broadcasts and prove that it is a ghost. But I know that it was just a crazy grandmother.